High above the world, where clouds turned pink at sunrise and golden at sunset, there lived a dragon unlike any other. His name was Ember, and his wings were the most magnificent things you had ever seen in your entire life. Ember's wings were the color of 1,000 sunsets stitched together. Deep crimson at the top, melting into blazing orange, then warm amber at the tips. When he stretched them open, they spread wider than 3 houses put side by side. And when he flew, when he flew, it looked like the sky itself had caught fire. Every morning, the animals of the Whispering Valley would come out of their homes just to watch Ember soar. The rabbits would stand on their hind legs. The deer would lift their heads. Even the grumpy old bears would stop their fishing just to stare. Ember lived at the very top of Mount Blazewing, a tall rocky mountain that scratched the belly of the clouds. His cave was full of shiny things he had collected over the years: smooth river pebbles, pieces of colored glass, a golden button he found in the meadow, and one very sparkly pine cone that he treasured most of all. But more than anything, Ember loved his wings. He would spend hours every morning combing through every single feather-like scale with his clawed toes, making sure each one lay perfectly flat and gleamed in the sunlight. He would fly circles around the mountain, doing loop-the-loops and spirals, just to feel the wind rushing through them. Ember, to himself, "Nobody flies like me. Nobody has wings like mine. I am the greatest dragon in all the lands." And perhaps he was right. But sometimes, just sometimes, being proud of something so very much can make you forget to be careful with it. One afternoon, a small bluebird named Pip landed on a rock near Ember's cave. Pip was tiny, about the size of Ember's thumb, with bright black eyes and a cheerful little chirp. "Pip. Good afternoon, Ember. The weather is turning. There's a storm coming from the eastern mountains. A big one. Maybe you should stay inside tonight." Ember huffed, and 2 small puffs of smoke shot out of his nostrils. "Ember. A storm? Ha! I have flown through 100 storms, little bird. My wings are the strongest in the world. No storm can stop me." Pip tilted his tiny head and looked at Ember with worried eyes. "Pip. But this one is different, Ember. The old owl who lives in the ancient oak tree says the wind will be sharp tonight, sharp as broken ice. Please be careful." But Ember was already stepping to the edge of the mountain, spreading his magnificent wings wide. He didn't want to listen. He never listened when he was feeling proud. "Ember. Tell the old owl to worry about someone else." And with one powerful push of his legs, Ember launched himself into the darkening sky, straight toward the storm. The storm came faster than Ember expected. One moment the sky was the color of a bruised plum, and the next it exploded. Thick black clouds rolled in from the east like a stampede of enormous bulls. The wind hit Ember so hard it felt like running into a wall made of cold, wet air. He pushed forward anyway, his wings beating furiously, his eyes squinting against the rain that now fell like needles. Lightning cracked across the sky, not the friendly kind that flickers far away, but the fierce, close kind that makes your chest vibrate and your ears ring. Ember tried to turn back, but the wind had other plans. It spun him sideways, flipped him upside down for a terrifying second, and then, with one enormous, howling, terrible gust, it threw him toward the jagged ridge. The jagged ridge was a line of sharp rocky spires that poked out of the mountainside like broken teeth. Every creature in the valley knew to stay away from the jagged ridge. Even Ember knew this. He beat his wings with every ounce of strength he had. His muscles burned. His eyes were blinded by rain. He could hear the sharp rocks getting closer. He could feel them in the air, their coldness, their danger. And then, crack. When Ember opened his eyes, the storm was still howling, but he was lying on a flat ledge halfway down the mountain. His whole body hurt. He tried to stand. His legs shook but worked. He tried to breathe. Smoke came out, which meant he was okay. But when he tried to spread his wings, he couldn't. A sharp, awful pain shot through his right shoulder. He twisted his neck to look, and his heart seemed to sink all the way down to his toes. His right wing, His beautiful, magnificent, sunset-colored right wing hung loosely at his side. Several of the great wing bones had snapped against the rocks. The scales that had once been so perfectly arranged were torn and scattered. Some had fallen away entirely, lying in the mud around him like broken pieces of a painting. Embed. No, 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 no. He tried again. The pain was so great that he roared, a long, sad, echoing roar that bounced off the wet mountain walls and faded into the storm. It was not a fearsome roar. It was the roar of something frightened and broken. He sat there in the cold rain, the greatest dragon in all the lands, unable to fly. Unable to fly for the very first time in his entire life. And sitting there in the darkness, soaking wet and shivering, Ember finally understood something the little bluebird had tried to tell him. Being the strongest doesn't mean being indestructible. Being proud doesn't mean being wise. But understanding a lesson is much easier than knowing what to do next. Ember closed his eyes against the rain, pressed himself close to the cold rock, and waited for morning. When dawn finally came, thin and grey and quiet, Ember looked out from the ledge and felt something he had never felt before, not once in his long dragon life. He felt small. The valley stretched below him, green and misty after the storm. He could see the winding silver river, the little clusters of trees, the warm yellow lights beginning to glow in the windows of the village at the valley's edge. Up here on the mountain, with no wings to carry him, the valley seemed impossibly far away. Ember had always been the one everyone looked up to, quite literally. He flew above them all, watching their tiny lives from the sky. But now he would have to go down. He would have to walk. Like an ordinary creature. It took him most of the morning to climb down the mountain. He slid on wet rocks, got his tail stuck in a thorn bush, and had to cross a freezing cold stream by balancing on stepping stones. A family of squirrels watched him from a branch, their eyes wide with disbelief. A young squirrel. Is that the dragon? Why is he walking? Squirrel mother. Hush, dear. Come inside. By the time Ember reached the valley floor, he was exhausted and deeply embarrassed. His injured wing dragged behind him, leaving a trail in the wet grass. He found a hollow beneath a great old oak tree and curled up inside, hoping nobody would see him. Someone saw him. Pip. Embed. Oh, Ember. I've been looking everywhere for you since last night. It was the little bluebird, fluttering down from a branch, his tiny face full of worry. He hopped along the ground until he was right in front of Ember's nose and looked up at the great dragon with those bright black eyes. Pip. What happened? Are you hurt? I knew I should have followed you. Ember almost said, I'm fine. That was his usual answer to everything. But when he opened his mouth, different words came out, words that felt strange and uncomfortable, but also, somehow, right. Embed. I need help, Pip. I've never said that before, not to anyone. But my wing is broken, and I don't know what to do. Pip was quiet for a moment. Then he did something unexpected. He hopped forward and pressed his tiny warm body against Ember's cold nose. It was barely anything. A bird the size of a thumb, pressing against a dragon the size of a house. But somehow it felt like the kindest thing in the world. Pip. I know exactly who can help. Come on. Can you walk? Embed. Yes. Pip. Then let's go. Together. Ember had never walked beside anyone before. He had always flown above. But walking beside Pip through the morning mist of the valley, the little bird hopping and fluttering at his side, chattering cheerfully about flowers and berries and a funny beetle he had once met, was not as terrible as Ember had expected. In fact, it was rather nice. Pip led him to the edge of the village, to a small stone cottage with a garden full of strange and wonderful plants. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the doorway. Wind chimes made of colourful glass tinkled softly. And sitting on the front step, as if she had been expecting them all along, was an old badger in a patchwork apron. Old Badger, Myra. Ah. I wondered when you'd come down from that mountain of yours.
Come in, dear dragon.
Let me see that wing. The old badger's name was Myra, and she had been a healer for longer than anyone in the valley could remember. Her cottage smelled of lavender and pine sap and something warm and sweet that Ember couldn't quite name. Every shelf was crammed with little clay pots and glass bottles and bundles of leaves tied with string. Myra examined Ember's wing carefully, pressing gently here and there, muttering to herself, nodding slowly. Ember tried very hard not to make a sound, even when it hurt. Myra. 3 bones broken. The shoulder joint is strained. The scales along the trailing edge will need time to regrow. I'd say 6 weeks before you fly again. Maybe longer. Ember. 6 weeks. That's forever. Myra. Longer if you're impatient about it. Bodies heal at their own pace. Ember. You can't rush a wing any more than you can rush a flower. She made a splint from carefully shaped wood and soft cloth, binding Ember's wing so it was held still and close to his side. She made a poultice from herbs that smelled like pine forests and spread it gently on the torn scales. She boiled a broth from roots and berries and gave it to him to drink. It tasted absolutely terrible. Ember drank every single drop without complaining, because even though Myra was a badger barely as tall as his kneecap, something about her made him want to be on his best behavior. 6 weeks is a very long time when you are used to spending your days soaring through the sky. The first week was the hardest. Ember lay in Myra's garden, feeling sorry for himself, refusing to talk to anyone, glaring at every bird that flew overhead. But the garden had other ideas about letting him be miserable. Pip brought him funny stories every morning, tales of the silly things the other animals had done, told in his quick, chirpy voice, with sound effects. A family of hedgehogs waddled by each afternoon and always left him a gift, an interesting pebble, a sprig of wildflowers, a particularly round acorn. 2 fox cubs from the edge of the woods came and sat near him, wide-eyed and silent, until Ember asked them what they wanted. Fox cub. We just wanted to sit near you. Is that okay? Ember, who had never had anyone simply want to sit near him before, found that he didn't mind at all. By the 2nd week, he was helping Myra in the garden, carefully, with his good wing tucked away, using his large clawed hands to dig holes for planting, and his warm dragon breath, turned very low, to dry out the herbs that Myra needed for her medicines. He was quite good at it. Myra. You know, Ember, I've never been able to dry my herbs so quickly in autumn. You've got a gift. Ember, surprised. For drying herbs. Myra. For being useful. There's a difference between being useful from the sky and being useful on the ground. Both matter. In the 3rd week, Ember asked Myra if he could help make the healing broths. She said yes, and spent an afternoon teaching him which plants helped with fevers and which helped with sadness and which helped with sore paws. He listened carefully, because for the first time in a long time, he genuinely wanted to learn something. He even apologized to Pip, a long, slightly rambling apology for not listening to the warning about the storm. Pip just chirped cheerfully and said he'd already forgotten it, which made Ember feel both better and slightly guilty at the same time. The weeks passed like that, slowly at first, then faster, full of small kindnesses and quiet moments and the gentle company of creatures who had no idea how to be afraid of a dragon who sat in a garden and dried herbs with his breath. On the 38th day of Ember's healing, when his wing was beginning to feel stronger, though Myra said it still needed more time, something happened in the valley that nobody was prepared for. Ember was in the garden, carefully crushing dried rosemary between 2 flat stones, when he heard it, a sound like distant thunder, except there were no clouds in the sky. A deep, rolling boom that came from the direction of the old mill at the far end of the village. Then shouting. Then the terrible orange flickering of fire. The old mill had caught fire. And inside the mill, everyone knew, was the winter grain store, the food that the entire village needed to survive the cold months ahead. But worse, Ember heard a name rising above the shouts. Little Theo, the miller's young son, who loved to play in the mill's loft with his wooden toys, was still inside. Animals rushed past Myra's garden in every direction. A bucket line formed from the river. The village was doing everything it could. But the fire was too fierce, too fast, and the loft stairs had already collapsed. Ember stood up. He looked at his wing, still bound, still healing, still not ready. He looked at the fire. Myra, rushing out.
Ember, no.
Your wing, if you fly now, before it's healed. Ember. I know. But there's a child in there, Myra. He began to pull at the bindings on his wing. Myra watched him with worried eyes, and then, with a deep breath, she stepped forward and helped him, her quick, nimble badger paws undoing the splint carefully, checking the wing one last time. Myra, the main bones have knitted. The shoulder won't be full strength. One flight, Ember, just one. And you come straight down after. Do you understand? Ember. I understand. He walked to the edge of the garden and spread his wings. The right wing, his injured wing, trembled as it opened. Some of the newly grown scales were still pale and small, not yet the rich crimson of the old ones. The wing was not as magnificent as it used to be. It was patched and imperfect and shaking slightly. Ember took a breath. And he jumped. The pain was sharp, a deep ache through the right shoulder, but the wings caught the air and he was up, flying low and fast toward the burning mill. He could see the small pale face in the loft window, the little boy pressing his hands against the glass, coughing in the smoke. Ember landed on the wall beside the window, clumsy, harder than he used to land, his injured wing not quite cooperating, and punched through the old wooden shutter with one careful claw. Smoke poured out. He thrust his big scaly head inside. Theo, coughing, eyes red. You're the dragon from the mountain. Ember. I am. And right now I need you to hold very tightly to my neck. Can you do that? Theo. Yes. The small boy wrapped his arms around Ember's neck with surprising strength. Ember pulled back from the window, feeling the weight, feeling his injured wing scream with effort, but he held. He pushed off from the wall. He flew, low and slow, and not beautifully, nothing like his old magnificent spirals, but he flew, carrying Theo safely down to the crowd below. He landed with a thud that shook his whole body and sat down immediately because his legs were shaking. But Theo was safe. And the crowd below, badgers and foxes and rabbits and deer and two very relieved fox cubs, made a sound that Ember had never heard before. They cheered for him. Not because his wings were beautiful, but because he had used them for something that mattered. Myra made Ember rest for another 2 weeks after that. She fussed over his wing with great determination, applying new poultices and checking the bones each morning, and Ember let her fuss without complaint, because he had learned that some things are worth taking care of. The wing healed, mostly. It would never be quite as it had been. The new scales that grew back were slightly different. Some were a paler shade, almost peach, scattered among the crimson and amber. The wing was a little stiffer in cold weather. When he flew, he had a slight tilt to his left that he hadn't had before. But he could fly. And oh, how it felt to fly again. His first proper flight after healing, Pip flew beside him, tiny and fierce, pumping his little wings as fast as they could go to keep up, calling out encouragements in his cheerful, chirpy voice. They flew over the valley in the golden afternoon light, over the repaired mill, over Myra's garden, over the river. And Ember felt something enormous swell inside his chest, something much bigger and warmer than pride. He felt grateful. For his wings, imperfect as they now were. For the valley below. For the small bird beside him. For 6 weeks in a garden where he had learned what it meant to belong somewhere. He still lived on Mount Blazewing. But now, every morning, he flew down to the valley, not to be admired, but to help. He dried Myra's herbs with his warm breath. He carried heavy loads for the village in his great clawed hands. When winter came early and fierce, he flew a loop around the edge of the valley each night, his breath keeping the cold wind at bay just enough for the crops to survive. The animals of the valley still came out to watch him fly. But now, when he stretched his wings, those mended, imperfect, peach and crimson wings. They weren't admiring only the beauty. They were admiring something harder to describe, something that lived in the way he flew, careful and strong and purposeful. Little Theo, who had recovered perfectly from his adventure in the burning mill, became Ember's most faithful visitor. He would climb a good portion of Mount Blazewing each weekend, a small determined figure with a walking stick, and sit with Ember on the lower ledges, listening to stories about flying. Theo, when I grow up, I want to be brave like you. Ember, you already are, Theo. You held on, didn't you? Theo, but you were scared too. You flew with a broken wing. Ember, yes. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the thing anyway, because it matters. And so the years passed in the Whispering Valley. Ember's patchwork wing became something of a legend. Visitors would come from far-off places just to see the dragon whose imperfect wings carried him higher than any perfect ones ever could. He never forgot the storm. He never forgot the night on the cold ledge, feeling small and broken and alone. He kept those memories close, not to make himself sad, but as reminders of what he'd learned. He had learned that strength is not the same as invincibility, that the proudest creatures can have the most to learn, that asking for help is one of the bravest things a person, or a dragon, can do, that being useful on the ground is just as valuable as being magnificent in the sky, and that the truest kind of greatness has nothing to do with how beautiful your wings are. It has everything to do with what you do with them. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Pip would land on Ember's great scaly nose and they would sit together watching the sun melt into the mountains. Ember would think about all the things he had once thought made him great, the perfect wings, the soaring spirals, the admiring eyes below, and he would smile, blowing a small satisfied puff of smoke into the evening air. He was still a dragon. He was still magnificent. But he was something better now, too. Pip, what are you thinking about? Ember, I'm thinking. I'm glad the storm came. Pip, really? Ember, really? Because before the storm, I had beautiful wings. But after, I finally learned how to use them. The little bluebird chirped, the happiest chirp in all the valley, and the dragon smiled, and together they watched the last golden light fade from the sky.